Hey everyone, and welcome to Lift, a podcast where we find out how different business owners are uplifting the people around them. My name is Manesh and I run Catalyst Content. Today, I'm talking to Michaela Jones from Destiny Rescue, a company that rescues and rehabilitates children from sex trafficking and slavery. In this conversation, Michaela takes us all the way to Thailand and Nepal, tells me a whole bunch of stories, and shares how Destiny Rescue goes about its life-changing work. Michaela, welcome to Lift. When I first heard about what you do, I was really inspired and I thought I must have you on my show. So could you start, please, by telling me, in your words, what Destiny Rescue is all about?
So Destiny Rescue is this amazing grassroots organisation that was actually founded by an Aussie man who wanted to make a difference. Never really kind of thought he'd end up in this. It kind of happened out of chance. So essentially when he was about 20 years ago, he went overseas with his young family, his young daughters, for a holiday over to Thailand. And when he was over there, he overheard this American tourist, essentially bragging about being offered the purchase of two young girls. And it really disturbed him as a father himself to know that there were children out there that were being exploited and abused for money. And for him being a dad of young girls, it broke his heart to that point. You know, sometimes when you hear something and it's like, why isn't someone doing anything about it? Well, he had those questions himself, and then he kind of felt, you know what, I need to do something about it. So there he was, an Aussie guy. He was a sparky, so not even in like the not-for-profit sector at all, but he decided to go on a quest to make a difference. And since then, they've been able to rescue 10,000 children and counting, which is remarkable, all from one man's decision to make a difference.
So many men have this. I mean, all of us have these instincts, right? To kind of protect, and we kind of share these values as well, like so many of us do. But this man arose when others, just talk about it, right? So I'm curious about what is it that made him arise?
I think everyone kind of has those desires to help and wants to help, but very few people kind of what to do. I think they want to act on it, but sometimes when a problem seems so big, and it's often paralyzing if you think about it. So for example, the issue of child sex trafficking is an issue that they estimate around 1 million children around the world are being trafficked. That's such a big number. It's impossible to kind of humanize a number like that. But I think what perhaps Tony does that maybe others might not do to the same extent is focus on focus on the next child in need. And rather than seeing this massive issue that feels like you can't help with, think about what can I do and what are the steps that I can take to make a difference to at least one children. And then when you help the one child, how do I help the next? If everyone just did their part, we can all make amazing change.
Yeah, that's really interesting because now 20 years on, 10,000 children on, and with this kind of large-ish organization, Destiny Rescue, you tend to forget that really it just started with one child. Do you know about who was this first child and how did he first go about it, and how has this approach changed over the years?
For a while there, it actually was quite difficult for them to rescue children. For a few months, they would go into these areas, particularly in Southeast Asia, and they were searching for these children that were working in these bars and brothels and trying to say, you know what, let's offer you a way out. We want to help you. We want to rescue you. And for quite a long time, the children weren't receptive. They didn't kind of want to go with this person and with this group of people who wanted to help them because in their eyes, in their mind, only bad people entered into the places that they were at. So they have been, a lot of children, unfortunately, that have been trafficked and abused have been trafficked because they put their hope in people, their faith in people who let them down, in traffickers and exploiters who kind of took advantage of their vulnerabilities. So when they saw someone else who was offering them all these promises, a lot of them have been in situations like that because people promised them things and lied to them. So the first few children that were rescued were more to do with them relentlessly going back, and they can see the difference in the men that were approaching them representing Destiny Rescue as opposed to the men that were there to abuse them. So they would go there and they could see the difference that unlike the other men that would enter into those places, these men didn't want to harm them. They didn't want to hurt them. They didn't want to take anything from them. They just wanted to protect them. So it actually took building that relationship of, you know what, we are different. We are here actually to help and to offer you that freedom that we're promising.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, that girls, you use the word girls, but how old are these girls?
So sex trafficking is something that affects young women, girls, everyone. But what we do at Destiny Rescue is predominantly focused on children. The ages vary depending on the country that we're working in, but on average, it's around 14, 15 years old is the average kind of age. But again, we've rescued young girls as young as, unfortunately, the youngest rescue that we've taken a part of was an online abuse rescue, which was an 18-month child. It's quite disheartening to hear that. So the ages definitely do vary, but on average, it's around 14 years old.
18 months is crazy. I mean, I'm not even brave enough to ask you kind of more about that, to be honest. And that's what I'm also noticing about people as well. Like, it's hard to have, difficult conversations. I mean, people generally, they're very comfortable having small talk, but to talk about something more meaningful is harder. But what you are trying to do is have these conversations about really uncomfortable realities. I'd love to understand what your experience has been in terms of telling the story of Destiny Rescue.
Well, firstly, I think it's such an uncomfortable issue to talk about. It's distressing. And also, I want to acknowledge that for some people, perhaps they've experienced their own situations of abuse, maybe not to the scale of being trafficked, but abuse in general. So I just want to firstly just say, if that is someone listening to that, and if that is uncomfortable, I do apologize. I'm very mindful that in order to talk about an issue, we don't always have to go in that detail, because when I want to talk about Destiny Rescue, and if I want to talk about the children that we're rescuing, I want to be talking about them as if they were, my own niece or my own sister or a loved one in my life. And you want to show the dignity and the respect that they deserve. So I don't want to go into details, graphic details. But what I do want to know is I don't want to take away from their story. And the reality is children are being trafficked. They're being abused. They're taken advantage of. And if we don't talk about it, if I don't talk about it and the work that we do, then how can we help them? Because if people don't know that this is happening and are aware that it is happening, then they won't be prompted to help, because they won't know that the issue is as big as it is. So when I talk about Destiny Rescue, I want to make sure that, I want to talk about these children with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. But I also want to share their story to the point where it will prompt someone who's listening to want to empower them and to want to actually help change their reality.
And how do you do that? How do you talk about the subject? How do you maintain their dignity? How do we talk about them so we don't start seeing them as poor things, poor victims? For example, I love how you use the word rescue as opposed to the word save, because I think to be part of a rescue operation, which is what all your donors are really a part of, is very different from being a savior. And the dynamic between the subject, the girls in this case, and the people who are helping out and being part of that rescue is so important, I think, to get right out of respect for other human beings as equals. So I'd love to kind of hear a bit more about your communication approach really at Destiny Rescue. Like, how do you go about talking about this with people?
I think the main way we do that, I always try to bring it back home. And even when I'm speaking to donors and supporters, I like to be mindful, if that was their child, how would they like someone speaking about them? And particularly with the issue of trafficking and exploitation, there's so many layers to that. There's so many kind of different ways that a child ends up being trafficked and abused. And sometimes, when we're so far removed from it, we can pass judgment. We can pass judgment on the situation, or we could kind of make assumptions that aren't correct. So when I'm speaking about Destiny Rescue, what I want supporters to hear at the forefront is that this child is important and is valued. So I just want to first bring it home and be like, think of these children as if they were, children in your own community, and how would you want them to be talked about, and what opportunities in future would you want for them? Let's now try and give that to other children in need.
I'd love to know if most of your donors and supporters and kind of workers for Destiny Rescue are Australian, or are they in Southeast Asia on the ground?
As Destiny Rescue was founded in Australia, it was an Australian kind of based charity. A lot of our supporters come from Australia. They were members of the Australian community that have really rallied for this cause, and that were kind of backed up Tony in his pursuit to help children all around the world. In terms of workers, when it comes to helping out with any kind of injustice, any issue, it's really important to get key players in the local communities that you're serving. So there is a mix of, Australians that have gone over there and supported, but also getting the support from the local communities as well. That requires also involvement with the local law enforcement and local government agencies as well. It is a real collaborative approach.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because a part of your kind of mission, as you state on the website, and as part of your operations, you don't just rescue, but you reintegrate. And so I'd love to understand how that kind of looks on the ground level.
Yeah, so what I think is really important is we don't want a child just to survive. We want them to thrive. We want them to go on to live fruitful lives with meaning and purpose, where they feel valued and that they can contribute and that they can just kind of take ownership of their future. So the reintegration is really important, particularly when they're in circumstances where the families weren't involved in their abuse. So if they have not been a key player in the abuse of the child or the trafficking of the children, we want to reconnect them back with their communities and their families. I'm a big believer that, family and close, healthy relationships are really important. So we try and reintegrate them back into their families, back into their communities, and also then provide them the necessary tools and equip them with the skills they need to move forward with their lives.
But aren't some of the issues rooted in family and community? I'm not an expert on this issue, so I'd love to kind of understand how they got into it in the first place. And isn't community and the families that they have come from part of the problem? Reintegrating them into those environments again, has that worked? Is that kind of like a blanket solution? There's so many kind of dynamic and different scenarios.
It is a tailored response. So we call it kind of a unique freedom plan. So every child's freedom plan looks differently depending on the circumstances. I think there is stigma that it's the parents or the communities always that are the ones that are trafficking or kind of responsible for their exploitation. And that isn't necessarily always the case.
Yeah, I see.
Also, I think the main issue tends to be when there's vulnerabilities in a community or in a family, it leaves them kind of more susceptible to being exploited, and traffickers prey on people's vulnerabilities.
So economic vulnerability?
Yes, that's definitely a big one. Even in the midst of COVID-19, we saw an increase in, children that were in positions where they were having to sell themselves in order to get food on the table. And I think it's very easy to kind of pass judgment on perhaps, families, and to say, how could a mother or a parent do that to their children or put them in harm's way? But they don't often know what their child is getting into. If you're a mother that is really struggling to provide for your family, you're in quite dire circumstances, and someone comes along and promises to give your child a better future, being able to offer them an opportunity to make money in perhaps, working as a cleaner or working as a waitress. And they think that what they're enabling is a chance for a child to have a brighter future.
To have a job.
A job, an income, a chance to be able to put food on the table. They actually might think that what they're doing is the best thing for the child, not even really being aware of what they're actually going to be entering into.
So they're being duped into it as well.
It's a lot of manipulation in a lot of cases. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't some situations where there is abuse happening, but I think for a lot of them as well, it's a case of unfortunate circumstances and vulnerabilities that leave them quite prone to being taken advantage of.
Yeah, I understand. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I feel like I'm being enlightened about the reality on the ground. And tell me more about these unique freedom plan. I'd love to understand how one plan is very different from another.
Well, I guess it's like anyone that's listening that has any children in their lives will know that no two children are the same. Sometimes they have their own kind of unique quirks and characteristics and desires and ambitions. So I think the freedom plans kind of try to factor in the child and what they kind of want out of their lives as well. So some children, once they're rescued, they really want to go and study. They really want to go back to school, and we try and, provide pathways to make that a reality for them. But some perhaps actually want to work. They actually want to be able to be feeling like they're helping contribute to the family household, and they want to perhaps get a job as a hairdresser or in a cafe, just kind of owning their small business, whatever that might be. So then we try and tailor the freedom plan that will actually suit and serve them moving forward. So really it is just entirely dependent on what is most appropriate for the child. Or for some, they might have experienced quite a lot of, physical and psychological abuse. And what is really important for them is access to counselling and trauma rehabilitation so that they can grow and they can kind of learn to forgive and to move forward with their lives without holding that burden of their past. So it really is, as I say, entirely dependent on those kind of unique challenges or what a child might want, what a young adult might kind of want to move forward. And we try and kind of factor all those things in.
Yeah, I see. And how involved does Destiny Rescue get with this plan? It sounds like you help the child kind of work out this plan. You accompany the child as they're kind of to articulate what their kind of goals are and their aspirations are. And it sounds like consultancy. It sounds like business consultancy or career consultancy, which is fantastic. But to what extent does Destiny Rescue kind of walk with them and help them implement the plan? Is there a connection service to the right providers on the ground with the government? Or do you have schools that you partner up with? How does the unfolding of the kind of plan look like?
So it varies as well in the country that we're working in. No, we're working in around over 10 countries and counting, and a few undisclosed locations. So for some countries that we work in, the government have more of a leading role post-rescue. So they might be the ones that kind of want to help take ownership of the plan moving forward as well, their freedom plans. But our primary and our major concern is that rescue side of getting them out. And then a lot of it is collaboration with, either the local governments, either local churches in the area, local communities, local businesses, with the post-aftercare side of things. So our involvement is setting them up on the pathway, helping them with that, but also wanting to work together with other organisations, maybe other charities as well, because it's like that saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, totally.
So it's that collaborative approach as well.
Has Destiny Rescue had to re-rescue girls?
We usually I think it's about a minimum of 2 years, track a child to be able to see that they don't re-enter into the industry. And on the rare occasion, unfortunately, that can sometimes be out of our control. But we have a very, very high rate of children that, do not go back there. I can't quote the stat because I don't remember off the top of my head, but a vast majority of them don't go back into the industry.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you tell me how some of these aspirations and these goals and these plans have kind of turned out? Like, can you tell me about how some of these women have gone on to really realize their dreams?
One of my favourite stories is hearing from one of our rescue agents who's been there since day dot. I can't, unfortunately, say his name for privacy reasons. A lot of our rescue agents, as you can imagine, their jobs are quite dangerous, so we keep their identities hidden. But this agent was sharing with us an incident that happened where he was entering into, it was about midnight, he arrived at one of our undisclosed locations in the red light district. And he was having that day where you feel like a little bit overwhelmed by everything that's happening, and you kind of start to wonder and to doubt the impact that you're having. And he was kind of feeling a little bit flat. I mean, he's been doing amazing work, but seeing day in and day out what's happening in the world, it can take a toll on someone. And as he was having this moment, and it's midnight in this red light district, and he's having this doubt about the impact he's having, he hears these two young women yell his name from across the road. And it first startles him a little bit, and he looks over and these two young women come running towards him and give him a hug. And it takes him a while to register the faces because these are kind of younger adult women now, and he's registering, and then he realizes that they look familiar. And then they say, "You rescued us several years ago." And they were talking for a little bit, and then for a second that realization kind of kicked in on him because of where he was and what time it was and the area, and he was scared. He's like, "What are you guys doing here? Why are you here?"
Yeah.
Scared that perhaps they entered back into the sex industry. And they said, no, after leaving your programs, they went on to become nurses. And now what they do in their spare time is they go back into the area that they used to be as children when they were being exploited, in search for young girls as well that were in situations where they once were, and they offer, that psychological support and also physical support with them as they roll as nurses.
How amazing that reconnection happened, and to discover that local capacity is kind of being raised to be rescuers, no?
It's empowering. And that's the beautiful thing about what happens when you rescue these children. It creates a ripple effect in their communities. They become advocates as well for other young women in their communities. And there are circumstances and situations where they could then break that cycle of exploitation. In some instances, perhaps their parents and their parents' parents were also trafficked or exploited. But because they were rescued, they can break that cycle for future generations to come.
Amazing. Tell me a bit more about these agents. They sound like very interesting people to be around. What makes a good agent? Is there a type that becomes an agent?
I'm unsure if there's a type as such, and the thing is our rescue agents are their identities and that are quite hidden, but some of them have been, they've been Aussie dads, Aussie fathers that have had this ambition and desire to want to make a difference. Others we've had have been backgrounds in military or backgrounds in kind of special forces that have kind of those specialised skills and unique skills that will help with an operation. And to do the work that they do, it does require them to have quite thick skin and to be quite relentless in it. So they do have those type of personalities where they pursue and they just move forward and are really relentless in their search for it. So my hat goes off to them because I don't think I would be able to stomach what they have to deal and what they have to see. But they are so driven with this desire to really just help as many kids as they can.
Are any of your agents women?
We actually have these amazing programs on the Nepal border crossing. And what it is, it's these Nepalese women that man these stations on the border, and they identify young girls that they believe kind of show signs that they may be about to be trafficked. And what they do is they stop them before they cross the border and they interview them to try and find out what they're doing, why are they crossing the border. And that is majority of them are Nepalese women. The amount of girls that they've been able to actually rescue before they even entered into the industry is remarkable, that they've actually been able to shelter and shield them and protect their innocence before it was ever kind of taken away from them. And that is mostly actually, that space is owned by women agents.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, I want to talk about competitors. And I know that's not the right word, but while living in Southeast Asia, I did come across another organization, and I know of other organizations out there that are also out kind of rescuing women and girls, right? I want to know how Destiny Rescue views these other organizations and how different organizations are taking different approaches, and help me understand this kind of rescue industry, if you don't mind.
I think the beautiful thing about the kind of industry that we're in is that our end goal is to see children rescued and saved. That is the primary objective there. So whether that be Destiny Rescue or another organisation kind of taking ownership in that space, that's amazing. So I think that idea of competitors isn't probably in the same extent as perhaps, if you've got two painting businesses working in the same suburb, because what we want is to see children rescued. I do think, though, a point of difference with Destiny Rescue is the grassroots aspect of our rescue agents go into the field, like into the darkest places, and do a lot of that real grassroots work of physically rescuing those children, whereas there are a lot of organisations out there that do the advocacy work, but not as much as that physical rescue component of it. But any organisation that does stuff in this space, hats off to them. We love that.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to understand about the kind of demand side as well for sex workers. A lot of these countries have tourists, and the tourists are the ones that are the clients, really, right? And so the demand for these girls, like who's working on the demand, on reducing the demand for these girls?
As we live in a culture where we've sexualized everything, mainstream media is quite sexualized, social media quite hypersexualized, and I'm a big believer that hypersexualization ends up contributing to the problem of children being purchased for sex. We have a very instant gratification society where we kind of almost expect and demand things, and that we're entitled to having what we want when we want it. So there is a big component of awareness and advocacy. So part of my role is, when I'm speaking with businesses or speaking with schools or individuals, is actually kind of reminding people why it's so important to treat people with dignity and respect and worthiness, and to not be contributing to the problem of sex trafficking by how you live in your day-to-day life, how you treat people around you.
Yeah. So do you guys go to, boys' schools and kind of have these conversations, and how does that look?
Yeah, we do that. One of my colleagues, Darren, over in Western Australia, does an amazing job in that space. He really speaks to young boys and kind of gets them to challenges the idea of masculinity and that idea of what it means to represent healthy masculinity. And again, I know it's not a problem that just affects men, but when it comes, that is kind of a primary kind of focus there, is how young boys are, because their access to pornography, their access to kind of these sexualized content, it's like never before. So he does a phenomenal job, Darren, at, speaking with young boys in particular about what that looks like and what the impact is and repercussions of kind of growing up in that society, and that the choice that they have to be advocates and to actually stand up for women's rights and for the rights of children as well.
I see. That's amazing that he's doing that. I want to pivot to what our audiences can do. So can you tell me what kind of donors and what kind of support Destiny Rescue is looking for from Australian community?
Great question. I want to firstly start by saying, if anyone listens and they think it's such a big issue that they can't be a part of, they 100% can. Everyone has the ability to do something. We don't have to do everything, but we can all do something. The best way, the easiest way to support would be to be a rescue partner, which is making a monthly donation of whatever amount is appropriate for the individual listening. And as a rescue partner, that actually allows our rescue agents to plan ahead, to be able to know how many rescues that they can do in a month and a year, and actually gives them the funding to be able to do that. So it is .org.
Yep.
Cool. If anyone listening wants to go to destinyrescue.org.au, they can easily sign up as a monthly supporter, as a rescue partner. And again, whatever amount that is, every bit makes a big difference.
$10, $5, $2.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, I like the $1 a day approach, or if you think about it, I mean, what we're doing is we're literally rescuing children, and we are giving back their freedom and their dignity. And if you're listening from a country like Australia, big coffee culture. Surely, rescuing a child for like a coffee a week or for, a coffee a day is
doable.
Yeah, when you think about what you're getting for it, if you think about any of your subscriptions to Netflix or Spotify or whatever it is, imagine subscribing to the lives and freedoms of children in need. Whatever amount, but keep that in mind of the impact you're having is phenomenal. So surely that's $50 a month or $30 a month or whatever your capacity is. But I think if you look at what's on your bank statement, I can't think of many other things that have such a profound impact of literally rescuing children from the most horrific circumstances.
Besides individuals, do you have businesses that make regular commitments to Destiny Rescue?
Yeah, we do. And they're phenomenal. So businesses can set up workplace giving as well, and they can do fundraising activities and events for us as well. We're open to any kind of like-minded businesses or businesses that want to have a social impact. So, I even encourage if anyone is listening and they're interested and wanting to know how their business can get involved, to get in touch with myself or to get in touch with someone at Destiny Rescue, because we'd love to have that conversation and find out how we can partner together so that your business is having such a profound impact for children in need.
I want to just pivot finally to kind of understand a little bit more about you. Now, you mentioned that years before working for Destiny Rescue, they were already your choice charity. I'd love to understand why you are working with Destiny Rescue and how you got here.
I would say a lot of that has to do with my upbringing and the parents that I've been blessed to have. My mum was a drug and alcohol worker, so she used to bring me and my brothers to her programs. So I've always kind of been very mindful of kind of welfare work and helping out those in need. My dad, very similar I grew up in a church environment where it was very much do unto others how you'd have them do unto you, and that service-based thinking. And when I was about 11, my mum watched this documentary with me about human trafficking. It probably wasn't the most age-appropriate one, so if parents are listening, maybe it's not the best move for an 11-year-old, but it opened up my eyes to the reality of human trafficking. And what really stuck with me was knowing, as an 11-year-old, that there were children my age in circumstances that I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even comprehend. And that kind of lit a fire in me, this desire to want to do something about it. And it never left. For me, there's no greater evil in the world than deliberately, maliciously taking away a child's innocence. So I did a lot of research on kind of organizations that were working in that space. And then I stumbled across Destiny Rescue and was financially supporting them for a number of years before being approached for a job with them. And it just seemed like the door was opened and it was the right opportunity came at the right time. And I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so wonderful that you kind of honor your mom, who really modeled a life of service. And it's so beautiful that you were able to be kind of brought up in that environment, thinking about others and really not just thinking about others, but living your life in service of others. Tony had an experience that drove him to change his life and put it on a track where he lives with a very strong mission in community service. You've come at it from a different angle, but how about all these other children and human beings out there whose parents have kind of regular jobs? What's our pathway into, a life of service?
I'm a believer that every single person has this kind of I call it like a justice kind of cause-shaped hole in their heart that they will respond to. For me, it was the issue of sex trafficking and social justice issues. For someone else, it might be that they hear about asylum seekers and that really resonates something for them. Or for someone else, it could be kind of healthcare related or animal rights related, whatever it is. I think everyone has some cause. So perhaps maybe if you're listening, you might think understandably that I think everyone's in agreement that, child sex trafficking is wrong. But there could be some cause in your heart that just really sets your heart on fire. So I encourage people to first just start paying attention to when you're reading the newspaper or you're watching the news or you see something come up, what do you gravitate towards? What kind of has that pain in your heart? And I'm a believer.
What triggers you?
Well, exactly. And I'm a believer as well. I use the analogy of a broken bone. For anyone who's ever broken a bone before, it's obviously very painful, but it's the pain that actually prompts you to want to do something about it. And without that pain, you wouldn't seek help. You wouldn't go to a doctor to get healed. So think about the issues you hear that cause you the most pain. And that's probably something that you're designed to want to support in that way. And you can support in any way. I just think use your talents, your skills, your business, your network, whatever skills that you're good at, you can utilize them in a way to help others.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned so much. And it's so inspiring to hear the stories about the work Destiny Rescue is doing. And I wish you guys well. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, and thank you for those who've taken the time to listen. Again, destinyrescue.org.au if you want to support.
Yeah, fantastic. That's all we have time for from this conversation. I hope you got a bit of lift from that. So thanks so much for listening, everyone, and happy changing the world, people.